Hey folks, on this episode of the Prior Transformation, I talk about blockchains and wealth. Hope you'll enjoy this one. Welcome to the Prior Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Smoots. In this podcast, we explore, there's no we, it's just I'm the only person here. And really, I just ramble for 2 or 3 minutes on a technology or business topic. And occasionally, I'll interview some smart folks. If you like that kind of thing, enjoy.
Wealth is a very interesting thing. So, when I was younger, I used to think wealth was having it all, meaning that you have a ton of resources. But when you really start to think about it, it's not a surplus of resources that creates wealth. I mean, it is in our context, in societal's context, just because we live in a concept of scarcity. But I would consider somebody wealthy if they didn't have to worry, if on a minute-by-minute basis, they had enough resources to continue and sustain their life, through their work or through not working or whatever it may be. So really, it's kind of more about time than it is about the actual resources. So for instance, if you're somebody who is wealthy, if it took 2 years, say if you had $1 million in the bank and you spent $100,000 a month, $100,000 a year, if it took you a year to get paid another $1 million, you wouldn't burn through all your cash just because you have the resources available to sustain in the short term while you kind of pursue that more long-term goal. And I think that's a huge difference, right? Where the wealthy people are, contrary to belief, usually living paycheck to paycheck. Their paychecks are usually just larger, way larger. You may work on a project. As an entrepreneur, you may work on a project for 5 years before seeing a payday on that project. In the short term, you may really be making sacrifices to live. So, wealth really allows you to kind of eliminate that need to be paid in the short term, and that's related to time. So, if you start to think about what that represents and how that kind of plays out in society, really all you have to do is optimize for the amount of time, for the rate at which somebody can get paid. If a person can get paid just as fast as they can spend, then you'd almost consider that person wealthy, because you don't necessarily need to, that person wouldn't need to wait. So for instance, I grew up in a situation where our bank account was probably zero or negative on average. My parents, I remember used check cashing places and that kind of thing. And it's very much paycheck to paycheck. And that struggle really made me realize that the concept of paycheck to paycheck is what's stressful. It's the time between the two paychecks that are stressful, because you end up accruing these expenses and you literally just cannot ever get ahead. But what if you never needed to get ahead, is what I'm saying. What if whatever resource you actually need was just there for you pretty much almost automatically? And I think that you probably could figure out a way to do something like that with the blockchain. And really what we're talking about is optimizing the payment system so that there is no time delay. So literally, if I work a millisecond and I make whatever per millisecond in fees, and I'm able to literally the next millisecond go out and spend that, and it's that tight millisecond to millisecond basis, you're literally talking about a society that starts to look, I think, a lot like a wealthy society, or like a society without constraints of paycheck to paycheck type situations. It's mostly, I think, just because you eliminate that stress. Somebody works, and as soon as they work, they can go out and spend the money. You can go get a sandwich after working 5 milliseconds, etc. So that kind of creates, I think, a notion of wealth. And if you can create that level of liquidity, then that's interesting. Now, technically, I guess something like this could be achieved using something like a MasterCard or something like that. It can't really be achieved using cash because cash has a real big limitation on shipping. Like you literally have to, if you want to send cash to somebody on a millisecond by millisecond basis, it's a pain in the ass. So it's better just to wait and to deliver that cash all later. So yeah, I really think that's super interesting. I mean, you actually kind of see this kind of thing playing out currently. You see things like AWS charging people on a second by second basis, or even millisecond basis for servers and compute, which is really interesting. You see Lyft, where rather than owning a car, Lyft and Uber, I can rent a car by the mile or by some kind of usage metric. So it's an interesting concept that's starting to come into shape, and I think it could be hugely transformative. Now, I think something like the blockchain is really the only thing that could really kind of create something like this. I think that having a general wealth which is attributed through micropayments would be near impossible with any kind of centralized system. So that's interesting.